Boris Johnson warns we could be on the verge of the biggest conflict in Europe since the Second World War. This is the east of Ukraine. The country's president says it won't be provoked into war. And in an exclusive interview with the BBC, the Prime Minister talks of the lives that will be lost if Russia attacks Ukraine.
I think people need to understand the sheer cost in human life that could entail, not just for Ukrainians, but also for Russians.
100 miles from Ukraine's border, Russia and Belarus take part in huge military exercises. We'll bring you the latest. Also tonight, hundreds of thousands of homes are still without power, and train services remain severely disrupted after the biggest storm to hit the UK in decades. And Great Britain's first medal at the Winter Olympics. It's silver for the men's curling team as they just miss out on gold. Good evening. In an exclusive interview with BBC News, the Prime Minister has warned that a Russian invasion of Ukraine would be the biggest conflict in Europe since the Second World War. Earlier, Boris Johnson told a security conference of world leaders in Munich that the military alliance NATO, a group of 30 nations, was united at a moment of extreme danger. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky has said his country is determined to protect itself from Russia, with or without the support of Western allies. Paul Adams has the latest from Kiev.
No need to panic yet. A country already at war for 8 years, still somehow taking this crisis in its stride.
I'm not scared, but my friends, some of them nervous a little, but I don't think that we will have a war.
But in the east, the situation is increasingly volatile. Ukraine's interior minister and visiting journalists forced to flee when their convoy came under shell fire close to areas controlled by pro-Russia separatists. The separatists are evacuating their civilians across the border to Russia, arguing without evidence that Ukraine is about to attack. Temporary housing being set up to receive women, children and the elderly. Men of fighting age being told to stay back.
My husband is a reserve officer. The men were warned to stay where they were, and children over 18 years old are not allowed out, so that everyone is in place.
In Munich, a conference dominated by Russia's challenge to European security. Boris Johnson warning that Ukraine cannot be abandoned.
And if Ukraine is overwhelmed, we will witness the destruction of a democratic state, a country that has been free for a generation, with a proud history of elections.
But Ukraine's president was there too, undiplomatically accusing the West of allowing all this to happen.
For 8 years, Ukraine has been a shield. For 8 years, Ukraine has been holding back one of the greatest armies in the world, which stands along our borders, not the borders of the European Union.
The government here says that Russia, through its proxies in the east, is trying to goad Ukraine into taking action, to give Moscow an excuse to intervene. The government says it won't be provoked, but these are very dangerous times, and any of the sparks now flying could ignite a much wider conflict. Paul Adams, BBC News, Kiev.
In Ukraine itself, tensions continue to rise. Ukraine's Russian-backed breakaway eastern territories have ordered military mobilizations amid a deadly escalation in fighting. Meanwhile, north of Ukraine, Russia and Belarus are carrying out huge military drills, while still insisting there's no plan to attack Ukraine. Our correspondent Steve Rosenberg is in Belarus, and a warning, his report contains flash photography.
Definition of muscle flexing? This. "100 miles from Ukraine's border, Russia and Belarus are holding joint exercises on an unprecedented scale. NATO says it's the biggest deployment of Russian troops in Belarus since the Cold War. At least 10,000 Russian soldiers within easy reach of Ukraine. But both Moscow and Minsk deny they're threatening anyone.
Our country isn't helping Russia to capture Ukraine, and Russia doesn't want to capture Ukraine. We don't need war in Belarus or in Russia. We've had enough war. We still remember World War II.
Russia insists that these exercises are purely defensive. Ukraine says this is psychological pressure at the very least. And at most, well, there is concern in Kiev and in the West that if there is a full-scale attack on Ukraine, then Russian troops in Belarus could be part of that.
America seems to think so.
For months now, Russia has been building up its military forces in and around Ukraine, including in Belarus. They are uncoiling and are now poised to strike.
Meanwhile, in Moscow, you may begin, Vladimir Putin told army chiefs. And they began. The president oversaw drills by Russia's strategic nuclear forces, showing off his country's state-of-the-art missiles. A message, perhaps, to Russia's rivals, and not a subtle one, that for now at least, the Kremlin is in no mood to compromise. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Minsk.
In a moment, we'll talk to our chief international correspondent who's been following events in Munich. But first, in a BBC interview tonight, Boris Johnson has warned of the possible extent of any future conflict.
I'm afraid to say that the plan that we're seeing is for something that could be really the biggest war in Europe since 1945, just in terms of sheer scale. I think people need to understand the sheer cost in human life that could entail. Not just for Ukrainians, but also for Russians and for young Russians. And that was the point that I was trying to make earlier on in my speech today.
Well, let's talk to Eunice, who's been watching events in Munich. And do leaders there think it is more likely than not that Russia will attack Ukraine?
That is the question of the hour, the question of our time. And it is a question not just being asked by you and me. The jarring reality of this moment is that that question has been asked around the clock for the last 48 hours and even before by defense ministers, foreign ministers, prime ministers and presidents, countries commanding some of the world's most powerful armies. Would President Putin do something which seems so illogical, so out of keeping with our times, to not just invade a neighbouring country, even to try to take over its capital? The world leaders who've been meeting here are all looking at the same intelligence, real-time intelligence. But it is only President Biden who has come out and said, I'm convinced that President Putin has decided to invade. But it's noticeable here, even Boris Johnson pulled back a bit in his comments to this gathering, saying that there was still chance that President Putin would pull back from the brink. Is it because people are hoping against hope? Maybe they do believe that President Putin hasn't made up his mind, because in reality, the only person who can answer your question tonight is President Putin himself.
Thank you very much, Eunice. Eunice reporting. And you can watch the full interview with the Prime Minister on Sunday morning with Sophie Rayworth at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning on BBC One. 150,000 households remain without power tonight, and many train services are still disrupted across the UK a day after Storm Eunice killed 3 people. Insurance payouts for the damage from the worst storm to hit the country for decades could reach £350 million, according to one estimate. There are 2 fresh weather warnings in place for tomorrow. One for wind for much of the country and heavy rain in the northwest of England. Danny Savage has more.
It's been a day of assessing storm damage right across the country. In Brentwood, in Essex, a 400-year-old oak tree came crashing down on a family home, causing extensive damage.
All of us were working from home. It was at about 11:30 yesterday morning, probably the height of the wind speed, I would say. We just felt the house move, and that was a big gust of wind, and seconds later the tree just crashed into the house, and we were covered in dust and just general debris, and we ran outside to see what had happened, and we were confronted with what you can see behind us.
140 miles away in Gloucestershire, Aston-on-Carent near Tewkesbury is just one of many places which have been without power since yesterday afternoon. The storm here didn't just knock over one tree, it destroyed a whole coppice. And when the bigger ones came down, they took out that electricity wire, knocking out the power for everyone around here.
Yeah, it just went like that.
This all happened in Pauline's garden.
Very, very bad. I've never seen the trees moving like they were yesterday. And I saw them moving, and I shouted to my husband, look at the trees. And I walked back into the kitchen, and by the time I got in the kitchen, he said, they're going, it's gone.
It was the Needles on the Isle of Wight where a gust of 122 miles per hour was recorded yesterday as the storm moved across the country. Numerous trees were uprooted. And vehicles were blown over on the roads. Passengers at Preston Station were typical of those trying to travel today.
It was absolutely awful carnage.
We got on at the first stop, we got a seat and everything, but it was standing for a lot of people all the way down.
People lost their lives in these winds, and because we were stood up on a train, we were just grateful to get home.
Wales was badly hit by the storm too. In Newport, today was about assessing damage and making things safe for the time being. The weather was still causing issues in some areas. Snow fell across parts of northern England. Storm Eunice may have gone, but the problems caused by it are very much still with us. Danny Savage, BBC News.
Let's talk to our transport correspondent Katie Austin, who's at Paddington Station in London. And 24 hours on, Katie. Train services are nowhere near back to normal, are they?
That's right. There have been plenty of delays and cancellations around the country today because Storm Eunice left lots of trees and other debris on the tracks that needed clearing and other damage that needed to be fixed. And a number of train companies today were telling people, please don't travel. That included South Western Railway, the Great Western Railway and Greater Anglia as well. And it looks like there could be some further disruption on the cards into tomorrow as well with those weather warnings in place. Great Western Railway says there'll be a speed restriction across its network. There'll be fewer trains, and again, delays and cancellations could be expected as well. So it's saying again, please don't travel unless absolutely necessary. Where trains are running, you can expect them to be pretty busy, and in general, the advice is still to check before you travel.
Thank you very much, Katie. A French modelling agent who was a close associate of paedophile Jeffrey Epstein has been found dead in his prison cell in Paris. 76-year-old Jean-Luc Brunel was facing rape, sexual assault and sexual harassment charges and had been in custody since trying to flee to Senegal back in December 2020. Right, it's time for the sport now, and here's John Watson at the BBC Sports Centre. Hi, John.
Thanks, Victoria. Good evening. On the penultimate day of the Winter Olympics in Beijing, Great Britain won their first medal of the Games. They had to settle for silver in the men's curling after a 5-4 defeat to Sweden. The women's team contest their gold medal match in the early hours of tomorrow morning against Japan. Laura Scott reports.
First medal. Bittersweet smiles, knowing only too well what could have been if Sweden hadn't been on fire on the ice. But anything Britain could do, Sweden could do better.
Oh, he's done well, very well.
Splitting these familiar rivals was at points too close to call. Time to bring in the curling compass.
A shot for Great Britain, it was close.
Or the cagey game of chess, the Swedes just had the edge. After nearly 3 hours of tactics and tentative defeats. Not the golden moment they so badly wanted, but once the obvious disappointment subsides, this team will celebrate a silver medal that finally puts Team GB on the medal table on the penultimate day of these games.
Yeah, that's pretty special for all of us, I'm sure. Just to know that Team GB are leaving with some sort of medal, it's feeling good, and hopefully the girls can go one better than us tomorrow.
Laura Scott, BBC News, Beijing.
Yeah, so lucky escape. To the Premier League title race now. Match of the day and sports scene follow this programme, so don't listen if you're waiting for the results, because here they come. Harry Kane. St Johnstone have moved off the bottom of the Scottish Premiership after beating Hearts. They scored in the first minute of their 2-1 win. Hibernian are up to 4th after beating Ross County. Rangers and Celtic both play tomorrow. And a reminder, you can follow the big showdown in British boxing between Kell Brook and Amir Khan tonight. The two former world champions due out in the ring in Manchester shortly via the BBC Sports website. That, though, is all from me for now. It's back to you, Victoria.
Thank you very much, John. And that's all from me. And remember, you can see the Prime Minister on BBC One tomorrow at 9 on Sunday morning. Have a good evening.